Well, right now, the state is warning parents about the dangers of one of the largest online gaming platforms in the country.
Yeah, Roblox, widely popular with children and especially teens, but the safety of that app is being called into question right now when they're playing online. Your reporter Taylor Knight live at the Capitol in Hartford with what's being done now at the state level.
Well, the state is launching an investigation into Roblox, claiming that it causes harm to children, especially young children. The popular gaming platform Roblox is coming under fire by Connecticut's Attorney General. Attorney General William Tong said that more than half of the kids in the country play games on the platform, and the company is not protecting them when it comes to who and what they're interacting with behind the screen. Tong says the platform is used to target and groom young children. Melissa is a mom of 2 daughters. She says when they were in middle school, they frequently played on Roblox. She did her best to monitor her daughter's activity, but says the state stepping up can only help.
They don't know who they're talking to unless their friends are on it, but there's other people that can join.
And right now, Roblox is part of an ongoing death investigation in Enfield. We'll explain that connection in the next half hour. Your reporter live in Hartford, Taylor Knight, Channel 3 Eyewitness News.